Hello, welcome to Furious Driving, and today I'm driving one of the, well, most interesting, and I'm striving hard not to use the word funky, but I think I might fail in a minute, small EV family cars on the market. It's the Kia Soul EV. Now, before we get into the review, if you like interesting cars, old and new, then please do hit the subscribe button. Now, on with the story. Hello, welcome to Furious Driving, and today I'm sheltering from the wind with this, the new third generation Kia Soul, and this is the Kia Soul EV, and this particular trim is the first edition, so it's loaded with a few extra goodies which make it even nicer. Now, in its particular segment, the Soul has always been a bit of a standout for being an unusual design, a bit different, a bit think outside the box kind of thing, which is something we like on this channel. The third generation, though, has grown considerably. Back then it was a rival to things like the original Mini. Of course, these days, the way the Mini's grown, it's still a rival to the Mini. It now stands at 4.2 metres long and 1.8 metres wide, so it's quite a big square squat thing on the ground, but that does mean you get plenty of room inside. Let's take a look around at this rather interesting bit of design. What will strike you is, of course, how square and squat this thing is. The big bluff front end, the fairly vertical upright windscreen, and then the straight across roofline like a Land Rover Defender coming straight down, cam-tailed at the back. These are quite unusual shapes, but it does mean you've got tons of space inside, and it's a really distinctive looking thing. And there are lots of nice design touches. Here at the front, the bumper initially comes straight up, then curves in, then juts out again like on a classic BMW, but it rolls into this amazing transparent band the width of the car, and although the side lights are following this bottom line, it then goes into a satin silver strip along the width of the car as well. Loads of detail there. Below that, we've got more lights down here in this clear area here. Lots of detail in the bumper as well. It's very easy for this kind of thing to go from interesting to fussy, but Kia have trodden a fine line and kept it just on the right side and made it a rather interesting thing to look at. Carrying on into the side, you'll notice this transparent panel wraps inside the bumper, which steps forward like a racing car. Then into the arches, which have got the plastic finishes around the edges, and the bonnet, which has got a step inside as well, giving it yet more detail happening. Then there are the wheels themselves, these multifaceted diamond and triangle shaped facets following the concave shape of the dish of each spoke, but then their own little ups and downs as well, making it absolutely amazing to look at and to watch. I imagine this is quite captivating if you saw one on the road. Moving further back, the design details continue pressed into the panel work, as well as giving strength to the shape of these very tall body panels. This swage line doesn't just start as a straight line, it swoops back in above the wheel and carries on before fading out. Down below we've got pressed in swage lines of plastic body protection as well. There's tons going on, but interestingly here at the top, this is almost the most interesting area. First of all, the roof line looks like it's actually rising up, but it's not. The windows are lowering down. And not only that, we have this extra quarter light behind the back doors, which means there's more light going into the cabin, and it extends the glass area even further. And finally, because it's an electric car, this is in blue, we've got the Soul name here in this black plastic panel. There's just so much happening. It's just a visual treat. It's a feast for the eyes. And there's even roof rails, so you can stick a roof rack on there. One thing I will mention though is that this car has gone from subcompact to not compact at all in terms of crossover as it is now, and it's actually very tall indeed. When I was trying to wash this thing yesterday, I couldn't reach the middle of the roof, and I'm 5'11". And finally, on the outside, we'll come around the back where everything ends, and so often design feels a bit unresolved at the back of the car, like they've run out of ideas, but here they just had more to go with and they didn't know what to do with them. So around this tinted rear window, it's also tinted on the side windows at the back as well, we have this wraparound light cluster which looks like it's going to be illuminating the entire thing. In fact, it's only the side areas, the bottom areas and the high level brake light, but there's more details yet to come. This black of the window continues into a black plastic panel here, and the bumper sits very deep against the road, making the car look quite low. Obviously it's electric, so there's no tailpipe to worry about. This could have disappeared down the rabbit hole of very, very fussy indeed. I'm not a big fan of crossovers, but this is interesting and different enough to make me think I actually kind of like it. Okay, let's take a look around the interior. Now you'll notice this is a really quite interesting bit of design. They've obviously followed the form and function that you have got seats and a floor and sides and windows and that kind of stuff, but they've been a little bit more creative with the way everything fits together, which is a good thing in my opinion. You definitely want to have a bit of creativity and a bit of flair, which they certainly have done. Now there are some really interesting features, for example these corner areas here where we've got front-facing tweeters firing sound straight at the passengers rather than from the side, so you get a more natural sound. These enormous air vents which actually come up in a big point and carry on that point into the top of the dashboard that flows around to the dash top. Again, a lovely shape. And moving back from that, look at this panel in the door. They've cut out a little gentle curve area in the door itself, which has got this beautiful little shape, this texture, which to me, before I'd read the blurb, I kind of associated with like a flow of air, zephyrs of air flowing from the air vents into the cabin. But now I've read more about the car, I understand this is meant to be representing music and acoustic tones, so maybe this is musical notes flowing into the door as well. Either way, it's a really nice visual bit of interest that just makes the thing just lift so much more. It's all dark muted blacks and greys and little bits of silver, but even so, it doesn't have to be boring. This is really interesting design. Also interesting is this big hoop design door handle. You can hear the wind for a second there, it's absolutely blowing a gale out there. It's a nice, I don't know if it's real metal or plasticized metal, either way it feels very solid and metallic to the touch. Further back in the door, more sculpting. This isn't actually soft touch, but it is sculpted, so your elbow, your arm can sit into that groove if you want to put your arm up on the side of the car. We've got a solid chunky door handle, big grasping area here so you can give that a decent yank shut. Huge, I don't know if that's a speaker there as well as a speaker there. The audio in this car really is fantastic. It's a shame I can't demonstrate it to you because firstly my microphone won't pick up properly the sound of car radios, and secondly it's all going to be copyright, but I'm telling you, it's awesome. So we have a grill area here, a grill area here, a large cubby bin in the bottom of the door with a scooped in area here so you can put bottles and cans if you want to. Moving up to the dashboard, it is a fully digital display here in the centre. On the left hand side you've got your range and battery information. The right hand side you've got your speed and your charge and power usage display information, and in the centre of all that we have the usual variable display bit. We can change all of that with these controls here on the wheel. So currently looking at how I'm driving, you can look at how your energy flow runs, average consumption. Currently it's been 3.6 miles per kilowatt hour, cruise information, speed limiter, that kind of thing. Now this is a big deal. The car is charging at the moment. Kia say it has a combined cycle of 260 miles. Generally when I've been charging up and starting in eco mode, it's been around 250, but we'll discuss this more on the road. It has been giving very accurate predictions about the mileage to expect, so that's a really good thing there. Now moving across to the dashboard top, it's a huge flat expanse. If you've got to file your tax returns and fill in lots of paperwork, it'll be fine to do it up there. We've got space for a large speaker grille, we've got aperture of a head-up display. It is of course a premium tea shelf area. If you want to be drinking your tea, having your snacks, taking your breaks in this car, you will not find a better picnic mobile than this. Maybe even this trumps the Rover R8. In fact, no it doesn't, because there's nothing to stop coffee running off. If you spill your coffee or your tea or your lemonade, it'll just run straight off onto your knees. So in that respect, the Rover R8 do still trump this. But back in the centre, surrounded by some piano black plastic, which I think will probably get quite dusty because piano black plastic always does, a big screen area. Look how wide this thing is. It's like a panoramic screen in the centre. We've got our air vents in the top, our twiddly dials. Even when you've got, say for example, the radio is up there, you've then got this little area on the right which will show you your range, your battery percentage, your driving range estimate, and how far it is, and locations to nearby stations if it wants you to go and navigate to them. And that is all located in this big floating lozenge area. So even though it's a rectangular screen, you're in a nice floaty round thing. And that's all Harman Kardon audio as well, so it's really nice quality stuff. Now moving down here, we have got our lovely to see physical controls for the heating and ventilation. Only single zone climate, not dual zone climate. And because it's a battery car, we do have a couple of specific things just to kind of keep energy usage down. We've got a button marked driver only, so if I'm the only person in the car, it will only direct air conditioning and all that kind of stuff onto the driver's seat. It won't waste any energy heating or cooling the passenger side of the car, because that's no point. Just don't need to do it, it gives you longer range. And we also have heated front windscreen as well as rear windscreen, again because it's quicker and uses less power to just defrost the screen that way than it does to try and blow heated air at it. And in addition to that, both front passengers have got heated two-stage seats as well, and a heated steering wheel, so if it's a really chilly morning you can keep your fingers toasty that way. Again, it's just less energy to heat that one small thing than to try and warm up the entire dashboard area of the car. Then this is an interesting area down here. We've got multiple power delivery systems. We've got a standard 12-volt fag lighter thing, we've got a standard USB plug-in thing, and then we've got a USB connection so you can hook the phone up to there. If you don't want to hook the phone up, this is an inductive charging area, so little light went out down there, plop the phone in just there, suddenly inductively charging your mobile. Brilliant. It's a nice big space, it's big enough for most handsets. The only downside, which I'll just quickly demonstrate for you if you bear with, this car does have Android Auto and CarPlay from Apple, which is super duper useful. Really, I do like having that all the time. However, that is, as far as I can tell, and if I'm wrong, sorry about this, Kira, I'm selling misinformation, but as far as I can tell, it's only wired CarPlay, not wireless CarPlay, and that means you need to have the cable plugged in, and when you do that, that's putting a heck of a crimp on that wire, and that's going to break. Continuing back into this piano black area, which you see has got a few smeary marks on it from being used. This is an interesting style of arrangement. We've got the power start button there, and then in order to go into the gears, it's a turny rotational dial thing from reverse neutral drive and a push button for park. Moving back again, we have got two very big usable cup holders, so even a big tall cup will sit in there and not fall over, even in spirited driving, which is very handy indeed. Got a nice useful slot actually here, which is just right for dropping your keys into. Because the problem with keyless entry cars and keyless go cars is, what on earth do you do with this great big keyring? That's way too chunky to put in my trouser pocket when I'm sitting in the driver's seat. It's really uncomfortable. So thankfully Kia has given us a slot where you can dump that instead of a useful slot in the dashboard, which is just so handy. Anywho, right, between the seats we have got a nice soft leather topped armrest, which is very deep, huge in fact, lots of room for activities in there. And then we should really mention these seats, which are lovely. Leather trim is standard on this first edition version of the car. It's a perforated hide, which looks really nice. It's got contrast grey stitching, and they are very soft as well. There's obviously, being leather, it's quite a hard surface, but it's a very soft padded seat, so you sit into it and you feel ensconced. You are wrapped around quite heavily by these as well. In terms of headroom, because this is a crossover style car, we've got lots of headroom. I could be wearing a proper hat. I might even go and get a proper hat just to go and demonstrate how proper a hat one can wear. A proper hat has been acquired, and as you can see, there's still a ton of room above the peak of this thing. The only problem I'm now suffering with is the fact the rear brim is crashing into the headrest. So I was going to say this is the ideal car for the modern hat wearer, but you would actually have to take off your head restraint if you're going to wear the hat in the car. So cutting edge consumer advice for the modern day there. Now, climbing into the rear, we've got a nice big door aperture. Now, advocates of SUVs and crossovers will say the reason you want one of these cars is because they are easy to access, and yes, it has got a very high H point, the point that your bum sits in the car, and a great big door. This car is a winner in that respect. Although, because the floor hides the battery underneath where we're sat right now, the rear footwell is actually quite high compared to the level of the rear bench seat. This is going to be a fairly common situation with a lot of electric cars going forward, because as more and more cars hide the battery packs underneath the seats, we are going to see this rear footwell raised issue occurring more and more often. Now, into the back of the car, we have not got as much stuff as you might expect back here. We've only got a single USB power outlet. There are not heated rear seats, but there are obviously electric windows. We do have that same lovely flowing notes of zephyrs of wind into the door handle going on there. Twin speakers again in the doors, and just the one seat back pocket. And because the roofline of the car extends straight back, we have got the same oodles of headroom above us as we had in the front. There's even a little porthole just here, just behind where your headroom will be sitting in the back seat, which means that the rear seat passengers are not going to be feeling claustrophobic and a bit penned in. Makes you feel a little bit less enclosed and more comfortable, so that's a good thing. Lots of nice touches in here. So yeah, it's fairly limo-like in terms of knee room, elbow room, and definitely in headroom. The only thing is that because of the floor situation, my legs aren't quite touching the front of the seat, so that could be a bit uncomfortable for taller people on longer drives. Now, getting into the boot is a little confusing, but confusing in a good way. I keep expecting the button or the release and the bottom of the boot to be around this black strip somewhere, even the button to get into it, but no, it's right the way down here above the number plate, where you also find the reversing camera, although it does mean it's a bit vulnerable to getting dirty along the way. That means you've got an enormous tailgate and tons of access into the boot. Now, presumably because the boot lid goes straight up and there's no means of connecting that to there, this is a manually flippable load space cover, and it does double flip to give you more access into this pretty commodious boot. It's not vast, I have to say, it's not an enormous boot, but it is certainly not bad either. It's got plenty of room for a week's shopping, that kind of thing. It might be a bit tight if you're taking suitcases to the airport, maybe that's going to be a bit of an issue, but you'll notice it's got the double height level thing, so at the moment we've got this down in the full depth of the boot available space, or you could pull this board out, raise it up to here and hide valuables underneath there if you want to, or have a fairly flat loading area, flatter loading area I should say. Amenities here in the boot, we've got a little light and we've got twin speakers, more Harman Kardon goodness going on here in the back. Under the floor you won't find a spare wheel, and I don't think this hole is big enough to put one in either. You have got a pumping goo kit and you have got space for the charging cable. Well, that's not currently here, that's plugged in the front of the car. Now the charge cable input port is usefully right at the front of the car, which means that no matter where you pull up you can get a cable to it. You haven't got to try and reverse awkwardly to get that rear corner in or something silly like that. There's also a handy LED light in the top of here so you can find it in the dark, and when you pop the bonnet up it looks a lot like an actual ordinary normal engine. The only giveaway here is the fact it says EV on it instead of something petrol related. What does strike you though is how low in the car all this is mounted. It does seem like a bit of a waste of space in some ways because that power unit is so small, and what they've done is they've put the batteries and the motor really far down in the frame of the car in order to give better weight distribution and better handling. Okay, this car is basically shaped like an aggressive shed, so it really has no business being able to do 0 to 60 in around 7 seconds. So I've put this into sport mode. You can tell that by the fact the gauge has gone to orange. Let's now do a fast getaway and see what it takes. Spun a wheel. Wow, that is that's just phenomenal. Really, that is just, it has no right to do that. It's just not, it shouldn't be possible. It did use 2 miles of range doing that though. The thing that Kia say they've strived to do is to make it feel more car-like and less like an electric blob or an SUV. And by putting the motor and the battery pack so low in the car, the battery pack is slung underneath my feet right now, and the motor, as you saw, is so low in the engine bay, that does work. It's moved the centre of gravity really low down in the car's body, and that does mean that when you get to a corner, it does feel like a car you actually want to have a bit of a play with. That's also helped by the fact the thing has actually got quite a lot of go in it. So the steering is quite light with just a little bit of feedback. It's surprisingly firm, almost sporty you might say. But the big deal is the motor in the front and the battery range. That motor is 150 kilowatts or 201 horsepower, and not just that, it's 396 newton meters of torque, which is immense. And all that power and torque mean this has got a 0 to 60 time of 7.6 seconds, which is brilliant for a big squat brick of a car. Normally have no trouble putting that power down. Or sometimes if you're squirting out of a roundabout with a bit of aplomb, if you're doing a hard turn, but spin one wheel, then the other wheel, then the other wheel, just trying to put the power down. But the big thing, which I'm sure you're most interested in, is the range. Has it got the range? Yes, it has. My kind of defining point from an electric vehicle going from being a bit of a plaything and a bit of a talking point to an actual useful car you can use daily is a 250 mile range, and that is where this thing sits. Kia even say that on an urban cycle they think it'll get around 420 miles because the regen braking will kick in and give you even more range with all the slowing down and so forth. But on combined cycle, everyday driving, they reckon 250, 260, which is absolutely incredible. And I have to say, I don't think that's an exaggeration at all. Yesterday I drove this thing down to Margate, which is a 50 or 60 mile journey in either direction, and unlike other electric vehicles when I've been to the seaside and done not much more miles than that, and I've had to stop on the motorway multiple times, when I left home it said 250 miles, when I got to Margate it said 200 miles, when I got back home again it said 145 I think, so it was almost bang on the money. It's only because I started putting my foot down a bit on the way back, I was needing a cup of tea, that's when the mileage started to slip and I was using more power. Although I will say one thing that does annoy me is the lane keep assist, which defaults back to on every time you turn the car on. So when you're not indicating and you're approaching a white line, it will give you a bit of a swerve, and I hate that so much in all modern cars. The pickup from the electric motor is absolutely instantaneous. It's a permanent magnet synchronous device, which is all the new clever stuff. And the battery, Kia say, is 25% more energy dense than existing other rivals, meaning it can pack more power into that smaller area down there and give us that more range. It does still weigh 467 kilos though, so it's a lot of weight in the bottom of the car, although that low position means you don't really feel it as much as you would if it was higher up in the vehicle. Now driving the thing, there's a few extra electric car only gubbins you might notice. For example, these paddles here by the steering wheel. These aren't gear changes, these are for the regen braking. You come with 4 levels from 0 to 3. 0 means no regen braking at all, and the higher the level of regen you have, the more 1-foot braking you have as well. So as you lift off the accelerator, it effectively brakes the car for you but recharges the battery very rapidly. Now you might be thinking, well, why don't you have that as a default all the time? Because it's great around town, but you get on the motorway, you don't necessarily want to be standing on the anchors every time you lift off the accelerator. Being a crossover, your ride height is a little elevated, so you do have a good view of your surroundings, and the windows in this thing are very tall. It's a lot of glasshouse area, so not only does it feel light and airy and open, you do have great visibility all around you as well. Going backwards, you don't really need it, but there is a reversing camera. And I have to say though, I don't think I've really looked at it more than 2 or 3 times, and that was only when I'm backing up to like a fence or a wall to make sure I didn't nudge it. It has 3 drive modes as well: Eco, Normal and Sport. And in Sport, things really do massively tighten up and the thing becomes incredibly rapid. Eco is where I tend to drive it most of the time because the performance is really quite good. It's more like Sport is a bonus feature rather than Eco is somewhere where you're suffering. There is one called Eco Plus where you push and hold the button a little bit longer and it moves into that one. It limits the speed to 60 miles an hour, dials down a few other things like the strength of the air conditioning and other assistances, and that's all user definable, but yeah, it means you get a little bit more out of it. Now one thing I've noticed with a lot of EV cars is they're very practical, very useful, they go where you want to go, and that's all great, but they don't really inspire you to want to drive them very much. This is actually a little bit different because it's one of the few EVs I've driven where it actually inspires you to want to go out and go for a drive. It's really quite involving. There's enough feedback from the steering, the brakes feel sharp, the suspension and ride make you just want to have a little bit of fun with the car. And normally I'll be driving with the radio on, and the stereo system is absolutely fantastic. And you find yourself just turning the music up more and more and more because it's just so good. There's so much bass just rattling around your feet, and the high notes and midtones are so crisp around your ears that you just want more every time. No matter how loud you have it, you want it a little bit more because nothing ever distorts. But now I'm sitting here in silence talking to you, I can really appreciate how quiet this car is. It is absolutely whisper quiet, and there's just that little science fiction hum of the motor. And it's going to take a couple of years for that to become normal and not make it feel like we are in some kind of sci-fi movie. Now this is the first generation of the Soul to come with a multi-link rear suspension setup, which is a massive advance over the old solid beam version of suspension that the previous cars had. And that does mean it's actually a car you want to get in and drive. You want to find some twisty roads and, well, throw it around a little bit. And you can feel the weight shift, you can feel the resistance in the steering wheel. It's all there. It's the stuff that drivers like is here in the Soul. This car has actually got some soul. Now in the UK, this is only available as an electric vehicle. It's not available with an internal combustion engine of any kind anymore. This might seem like a rash decision on Kia's part, but on the last generation, the EV version was outselling the internal combustion version, so they just dropped it completely. There's also a smaller batteried and less powerful electric version available on the continent, but they have decided to drop that in the UK and just go with one more powerful version, as they feel that'll be the one that will sell better, and let's not confuse the issue. Something which has become typically Kia is the build quality. As well as the ride quality being good, the build quality seems, well, pretty up to par as well. These things are nailed together in Korea, as you I'm sure know, and they do a very good job of it indeed. There's no squeaks, no rattles, everything clonks closed as it should do. Overall, it's a very well put together car. In terms of practicality, the boot, as I mentioned earlier, is quite big. It's 315 litres of space with the seats up, over 1,000 litres with the seats down. The only thing you may have noticed is there is a bit of a high lip on the back of that thing, so even though the boot lid comes down a long way into the body, it's still a bit of a step up to get things into the back of the car. The only thing I don't like about it, beyond that lane keep assist, is the fact it is very wide. 1.8 meters wide, in fact. 1.82 if I'm being really precise. And that makes it very big on the road. Getting through narrow gaps would potentially be an issue. Parking certainly is an issue. I've put it into a couple of car parks this week and it has been touching the wheels on the white lines on both sides. That does mean it is extremely spacious on the interior, which is a great thing for the occupants. So what does it cost to join the Soul Club? Well, if you like the look of this Soul EV, and honestly, why wouldn't you? It's going to cost you 32 grand and change for this heavily loaded first edition model, which is available in 3 different colours, all with a contrast roof. Well, thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this ride out in the Kia Soul EV. It is a fascinating little car with some really interesting design touches and plenty of range to make a really useful, drivable, practical, everyday car that's got a bit of character, which is maybe a bit lacking in some of the EV offerings at the moment. If you've liked this, please, as always, hit like and subscribe, and join me again next time driving something completely different.